I rise today to oppose unauthorized, undeclared, and unconstitutional war. What we have today is basically unlimited war, anywhere, anytime, any place upon the globe. My amendment would sunset in 6 months the 2001 and 2002 use of authorization of force. What does that mean? This was legislation passed many years ago to go after the people who attacked us on 9/11. I supported that battle, but I think the mission is long since over. I don't think that anyone with an ounce of intellectual honesty believes that these authorizations from 16 years ago and 14 years ago, I don't think anyone with intellectual honesty believes that they authorize war in 7 different countries. Not only is it the lives that we are losing, the American soldiers, the brave young men and women who are sent to distant lands and asked to give their life for their country without the Senate taking the time to authorize the war, I think that is terribly unjust and should end. There are some who argue that we don't even need to vote at all. Some of the presidents, Republican and Democrat, have said they have Article 2. This is the second article of the Constitution. They say by the Constitution they can do what they want, when they want, where they want, and that Congress never has to approve their authorization, never has to give authority to go to war. These advocates of perpetual war argue that these powers are implicit and that no one can stop a president that wants to go to war. This is diametrically opposite of what our founding fathers thought. Madison, in particular, disagrees. Madison wrote that the executive branch is the branch most prone to go to war. Therefore, the Constitution, with studied care, vested that power in the Congress. You see, our founding fathers saw the history of Europe as the perpetual history of war. Brothers fighting brothers, kings of 2 different countries who were cousins, brothers, uncles, fathers, sons. The history of Europe was perpetual war. When we broke away, we said, we are going to have some checks and balances in place. We are going to make it difficult to go to war. We are going to vest that power in the Congress. But somewhere along the way, we lost our way, and we now commit ourselves to war, or one man or one woman commits us to war without any vote by Congress. This is not what our founding fathers intended. Former President Obama, when he was a candidate, wrote that no president should unilaterally go to war unless we were under imminent attack. That is the understanding of the Constitution that most originalists take. And yet, once President Obama was in the White House, he bombed 7 different countries. He expanded the use of executive power. He expanded the war-making power of the presidency, even all along saying, well, he was for a narrow interpretation. Candidate Trump said that the war in Afghanistan had lost its purpose, that it was a disaster and should end. He said this on maybe 15 different occasions. And yet now that he is in the White House, the generals have said, we must fight on, we must continue to fight. If we leave, the Taliban will take over. My question is, when will the Afghans stand up and fight? We've spent $1 trillion helping them. We spent billions of dollars trying to convince them not to grow the poppy that becomes the opium that addicts the world. And yet last year, Afghanistan had the biggest crop of poppy they've ever had in recent history. The people who run Afghanistan that we put into the government, the Karzai family, full of drug dealers, crooks, and thieves. You wonder why they're not popular in their own country. But my question is, where'd the $1 trillion go? How come they can't defend themselves? How come we have to fight their wars for them? But the one thing is for certain, the war was not authorized by you, the people, and the war was not authorized by us, the Congress, and therefore the war is unconstitutional. The war is unauthorized. You say, well, do we ever get it right? Do we ever vote to authorize war? Well, yes, we have. When we went to war in Afghanistan the first time, and I would have voted yes, there was a vote, and overwhelmingly we voted to go in. Some have argued, well, 6 months, is that enough time for Congress to do anything? Can they get anything done in 6 months? Well, when we were attacked in Pearl Harbor, you know how long it took us to declare war? 24 hours. When we were attacked on 9/11, how long did it take us to authorize the military force to go in? 3 days. And people say, well, Congress will never get it done. Maybe it's because we're divided, we haven't been attacked, we have no clear purpose in Afghanistan, and there is no clear route to victory. Realize that President Obama in 2011 put 100,000 troops into Afghanistan. Sure, he pushed the Taliban back. Where did they go? To our ally Pakistan, who has gotten billions and billions of dollars of American welfare, and as we sit here, is destined to get another $500,000 in your money in American welfare over the next month. Billions and billions of dollars we send to Pakistan, but where does the Taliban live? In Pakistan. They run back and forth across the border. So we have to ask the question, what is our purpose? Are we nation building? You know, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars building their roads, building their bridges, building their schools. They bomb them, we bomb them, somebody bombs them, then we rebuild them again. We've got $150 billion worth of damage in Texas. You know how we should pay for it? Let's quit sending welfare to foreign countries. Let's look at our country first, rebuild the problems we've got here, rebuild our roads, our bridges, our schools, and not borrow it, not add to a $20 trillion debt. Take the money we're sending in welfare to foreign countries, and let's rebuild our own. We are at war in 7 countries, none of them voted on by Congress. Is it expensive? Yes, to the tune of trillions of dollars. Today we will debate the issue of war and whether Congress is constitutionally bound to declare war. We will debate whether one generation can bind another generation to perpetual war. We are at the point where we've been so long in Afghanistan that people are fighting. Within the next year, there will be people fighting who were not yet born at the time of 9/11. This war no longer has anything to do with 9/11, has no longer anything to do with any vital interest of our country. It has to do with us believing that we can reshape the world and make the world safe for democracy. Everybody's going to love America and everybody's going to become a Western-style democracy. Guess what? It's never going to happen. Afghanistan's not even a real country. It's a collection of 5 or 6 tribal lands that were stuck together by Europeans who had no knowledge of the local people. They don't even like each other, much less us. They are not a country. They will not listen to Kabul. You know what they call the president who resides in Kabul? They call him the mayor of Kabul, derisively, because he has no sway over them. They're interested in who their chieftain is in their local area. They speak 5 different languages. They're never going to be a country. But if you want to be at war there, you want to send your sons and daughters to Afghanistan, you think somehow that's going to make our country safer, let's vote on it. So what I'm advocating is a vote. For the first time in 16 years, I'm advocating we should vote on whether or not we should be at war. Should be a simple vote. But you know, it's like pulling teeth. I've been trying very hard to get this vote for 5 years now. I'm this close. I'm hoping we get the vote today or tomorrow, but it isn't easy because we've been obstructing and obstructing and obstructing, and no one wants to be on the line. Well, that's why we were elected, to put our name, put our John Hancock on the line. Are you for the war or against the war? I think I'm done. I'm done. I'm ready to come home. I remember my father saying in one of the presidential debates in 2008, they said, how will you get the people home? He says, we just marched in, we can just march out. There is no more meaning or purpose in Afghanistan. We had 100,000 troops there in 2011. All of the Taliban scurried into Pakistan, and as soon as the troops diminished, they came back. And some people take from that lesson, they say, well, we need 200,000, or we need 500,000 troops, or we need to stay there forever and police every corner for them. I take it to mean that the government themselves over there do not have the popular support of the people. Stand up and fight for your country. Half of the people in Afghanistan who were helping us over there came to our country. They fled. Same with Iraq. All the good people in Iraq, our translators, the pro-Western people, they came to our country. Now, I understand wanting to come to a good place, but it'd be like the people who signed the Declaration of Independence after they fought the war and America won, going back to England and saying, oh, it's dangerous in the new country. But that's what we've been saying year after year. And so the people who have pro-Western values from Afghanistan now live in the United States, and the same in Iraq. The thing is we need to have some tough love. They need to practice some responsibility, and they need to take ownership of their country. But as long as you coddle people, as long as you give people stuff, as long as you fight their wars for them, they're not going to step up and fight. We are going to debate whether Afghanistan is a winnable war. We will also debate whether war in Yemen is in our national interest. Most of America doesn't know we're at war in Yemen. Most of America doesn't know where Yemen is. And we need to know why we're there and whether it's of any value to the United States. We will debate whether our support for Saudi Arabia is exacerbating starvation and the plague of cholera in Yemen. We will debate whether it is in our national interest to topple the government of Syria. 2 million Christians live in Syria. Guess what? We may not understand it, but most of those Christians support Assad. On the side of the war that we've been funding and arming with the radical Islamists from Saudi Arabia and with the radical Islamists from Qatar are the people who hate the Christians. We're fighting on the side of the people who hate the Christians in Syria. Does that make Assad a good guy? No. But the thing is, maybe there's sometimes no good person in a war, no good side to a war. For 5 years, I've been fighting to have a vote on whether or not we should be at war and where. I think there is no greater responsibility for a legislator than to vote on when we go to war. I tell the young soldiers that I meet that it is my responsibility to discuss, debate, and think seriously about whether we send them to war. And one of the things that's most mistaken by politicians, even some who are well-intended, they think every soldier in America is jumping up and down to go to their 8th tour in Afghanistan. Go out and meet the soldiers. They are not allowed to be politically active. They are not a political force on Washington. But I guarantee if you were to ask our soldiers, are you ready to go back for your 8th tour of Afghanistan? Do you see purpose in Afghanistan? They've lost sight of what that purpose is. I met a Navy SEAL about a year ago. He'd been in for 19 years, tough guy, they all are. And he said to me this, he said, you know what? We can defeat any enemy, we can kill any enemy, we can succeed at almost any mission you give us, but the mistake is when you, Congress or a president, the mistake is when you tell us to go somewhere and plant the flag and create a country. We're just not very good at nation building. We have the world's most elite military. We can defend our country. We can defend without question against all invaders. And yet, we are not very good at making countries out of places that aren't. And what we should think about is we have a $20 trillion debt. We borrow $1 million a minute. Even if you thought it was a good idea to try to create a country in Iraq or create a country in Afghanistan or create some sort of paradise in Yemen or Somalia or Nigeria or Libya or any of the places we are, even if you thought some paradise was a great thing, we have no money to do it. We are destroying our country from within. We are eating out the substance of the very greatness of America by borrowing $1 million a minute. We are flat broke and we can't afford to be everybody's Uncle Sam. We can't afford to be everybody's Uncle Patsy. We can't afford to keep exporting our money and our jobs to the rest of the world. We need to look at our country and say, it's time we did things for our country, for our people, and it's time we quit borrowing $1 million a minute. The question is, will the senators, will those who gather to vote, will they stand for the rule of law? Will the senators stand for congressional authority for war? Will they stand for what the Constitution clearly says in Article 1, Section 8, that Congress shall declare war, not the president? Congress shall declare war. Or will the senators idly sit by and let the wars continue, unabated and unauthorized? Some will argue that sunsetting the old authorizations is too soon, too dramatic. Really? 6 months and 16 years later, we haven't decided whether we should be at war or where we should be, and we can't decide in 6 months? Took us 24 hours to decide in Pearl Harbor. Took us 3 days to decide in 9/11. I think 6 months is more than enough time. Will Congress do their job unless they are forced to? All history says no. Why does Congress have 11% approval rating from the people? Because they're not doing their job. How do we force Congress to do their job? Give them deadlines. How can we get a deadline? Let's pass this. Let's let the authorizations expire. Let's have a full-throated, deep, and heartfelt debate over whether we should be at war and where. Should we be at war in Afghanistan? Is there a winnable and foreseeable winnable future there? Should we be at war in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya? Today's vote can be seen as a proxy vote for the Constitution. Today's vote is not really a vote for or against any particular war. Today's vote is simply a vote on whether we will obey the Constitution. Today's vote is a vote on whether Congress will step up and do its job. 16 and a half years is more than enough time to determine whether the war in Afghanistan or Yemen or Libya or Somalia, whether any of these wars has purpose or real meaning for our national security. Often it is said very glibly that, well, yes, it's in our national security interest. Realize that when people tell you that, they're giving you a conclusion. That's the beginning of the debate. We could debate for hours and hours, and hopefully we'll have some of that debate, but we have to debate what is in our vital national interest. Just to say it is so doesn't make it so. Does anybody in America think that the war in Yemen is in our vital interest? Most people don't know where Yemen is, much think it's in our vital interest. Guess what? The war in Yemen may actually be opposed to our vital national interest. It may be making it worse. The war in Libya certainly did. President Obama, when he chose to act illegally and intervene in Libya, made the world less safe. Wasn't his intention. I'll grant him his motives were to make it more safe, but he made the world less safe. Why? Because when Gaddafi was toppled, you got chaos. You've got two competing governments in Libya, and you have chaos. If you want to set up a terrorist camp, if you're ready to go find a good place in the world, Libya is one of the prime places to go now because the government's gone and it's chaos. So I would argue that the intervention, one of the wars that we fought illegally without the approval of the Senate, under the unilateral action of the president, made us less safe. That's why we're supposed to debate before we go to war. We are less safe because of the Libyan war. How about the Syrian war? Christians on one side, us on the other side. That's the first problem I have. The people on the side of the war that we supported are the radical Islamists. ISIS was on the side we were supporting. In fact, one of the most famous, if not the most famous and important leaked email from Hillary Clinton, from WikiLeaks, was when Hillary Clinton sends an email to John Podesta and she says to him, we need to exert some influence on Saudi Arabia and Qatar because they are giving financial and strategic assistance to ISIS. Realize that. The people we're selling weapons to in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they get all their weapons from us. They're getting those weapons from us. Guess who they give them to? ISIS. They were on the same side as ISIS. And let's say even you don't believe that. You say, I really don't believe that. Certainly they wouldn't have done that, and we wouldn't support the bad people. Let's say we just supported the so-called moderates. They're still fighting against the guy that's protecting the Christians. What was the net effect of the Syrian civil war? Before we got involved, Assad was winning. Once again, like Gaddafi, not a great guy, but he does defend, and the Christians do support him. He was winning the war. We turned the tide of the war by flowing in hundreds and hundreds of tons of weapons in 2013. Us, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. But these weapons went in indiscriminately. What happened when we turned the tide of the war? Chaos and a vacuum. In that vacuum, guess who arose? ISIS. So when you created chaos in Libya by fighting an unconstitutional, unauthorized war, you got more terrorism, more chaos, and the world is a less safe place. When we got involved in Syria without the authorization of Congress, unconstitutional, unauthorized, what did you get? Chaos and the rise of ISIS. What do we have in Yemen right now? In Yemen, we have a Sunni-backed government in exile supported by the Saudis, and you have these Houthi rebels supported by Iran. But that's not all you have in Yemen. You also have al-Qaeda of the Arab Peninsula, 3 different groups. It is said that al-Qaeda of the Arab Peninsula is actually the strongest remaining presence of al-Qaeda. Is it possible that in us supporting the Saudi Arabian-backed government against the Houthis, that they fight and kill each other to such a degree of chaos that al-Qaeda of the Arab Peninsula fills the vacuum? Well, if you look at Libya, that's what happened. If you look at Syria, that's what happened. What if it happens in Yemen? And you have to say, what is our vital interest in Yemen? Why are we in Yemen? Why are we supplying bombs to the Saudis? Is it somehow making us safer for terrorism? Are we killing them over there so they don't kill us over here? Well, guess what? We may be creating more terrorists than we can possibly kill. The Saudis bombed a funeral procession of civilians. They killed 150 people and they wounded 500. Do you think they're ever going to remember or ever forget about it? That's going to be passed down through oral tradition for 1,000 years, and they will talk about the day the Saudis came and bombed civilians. And they will also say in the next breath, guess who gave them the bombs? The Americans. Guess who helped guide the planes? Guess who refueled the planes in the air? The Americans refueled the Saudis the day they came to bomb a funeral procession. So in the end, we killed 150 people, and you should say, well, they were all bad people. They were at the funeral of a bad person. Well, do you think we killed 150 and that's the end of it? Or do you think those who were wounded that survived and went back to their villages tell every one of their neighbors and everyone in the village about the day the Saudis came with the American bombs? So we have to ask ourselves, are we making things better? Is Yemen in our vital national interest? Are we making things better or are we making things worse? Is there a possibility that we lead to such chaos that al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula rises up and becomes a real threat to us? What else is happening in Yemen? It's one of the poorest countries on the planet. 17 million people, as we speak, live on the edge of starvation. 17 million people. They're having the largest outbreak of cholera. Where's most of this happening? Where's most of the starvation, most of the killing, and most of the cholera? It's in the areas that are being bombed by the Saudis. They have bombed the infrastructure into ruins, and there is no clean water. So you have cholera being spread. War is probably the most common and most important precipitating factor in humanitarian disasters. If you look at humanitarian disasters around the world, you'll find the number one cause is war. And Yemen was already a poor place to begin with. But you're fighting the war and nobody asked your permission. You're fighting a war in Yemen through the proxy of Saudi Arabia, and no one has asked my permission. This is a grave insult to us. It is dangerous to the Treasury, but it's also your sons and daughters are being asked to go to Yemen now. We had a manned raid in Yemen and lost one of our Navy SEALs. I've asked what we got, and they just sort of push me off and say, oh, they might tell me on another occasion. No one will tell me what we got. They claim it was great. It was the best stuff you could ever find. It's going to prevent all these kinds of loss of lives. But the thing is, we have no business in Yemen. We've not voted to go to war in Yemen. We've been at war 16 years, the longest war now in Afghanistan. There is no purpose left. There is no future for the war in Afghanistan. Today's vote will be remembered as the first vote, if we have it, in 16 years on whether to continue fighting everywhere, all the time, without ever having to renew the authorization of Congress. I hope senators will think long and hard about the 7 ongoing wars, and at the very least show regard for our young soldiers, and go on the record to uphold their oath of office. Each senator should uphold their oath of office and defend the Constitution and its requirements with regard to war. I, for one, will stand with soldiers, young and brave, sent to fight in distant lands in a forgotten forever war. I will stand for the Constitution. I will stand with our founding fathers who did everything possible to make the initiation of war difficult. I hope my colleagues will stand for something. I hope my colleagues will finally vote to do their constitutional duty and oversee and or discontinue the many wars we are in. But even if my colleagues say war, war, that's the answer everywhere all the time, by golly, come down here and put your name on it. If you think we should be at war in Afghanistan, vote for it. If you think we should be at war in Yemen, come down to the floor and vote for it. What does everybody do? Pass the buck. Let the president do it. Let the president take the blame if things don't go so well. We should vote. So on my amendment, you'll probably see the majority will say, we don't want any responsibility. Let the president take care of that. My vote isn't actually directly on any of the wars, although I do oppose most of the wars we're involved in. My vote is on whether or not we should vote on whether we should be at war. So for those who oppose my vote, they oppose the Constitution. They oppose obeying the Constitution, which says we are supposed to vote. They're going to say, no, I refuse to vote on any of these wars. All my amendment does is it sunsets an authorization that really doesn't apply to anything we're doing at the moment and says in 6 months' time, you have to come up with an authority to go to war. I hope my colleagues will stand for something. I hope they will finally vote to do their constitutional duty. It is the least we can do to honor the service of our brave young soldiers. Thank you, Mr. President, and I reserve the remainder of my time.